Hello, welcome to Tuesday Tea with Elsa. It's so hot out today. I actually am not drinking tea. I should have brought my water with me, but in any case, it's Tuesday Tea with Elsa without tea. So I am hanging out with Ari and Ocasio, and they just came in from the pasture and are getting some water at the water trough. And I was thinking today that one of my favorite things about being with horses is looking out for their quality of life. What kind of quality of life do they have? Where do they have to live? Who are their friends? What is their health like? What is their education like? You know, all these things are really important to me. And sometimes I feel like I fall short of all the things I'd like to do for them. And it's good for me to take a day and look at all the things they do have, all the really fabulous things in their life. You know, here I am sitting in the shade of the cherry tree, and Ocasio's drinking from the water trough that's full, and Ari's taking a nap in the shade. And life is pretty good here. I have big plans for my horses. I always have big plans for my horses, but there is a check and balance system of what I plan for them and what I'm actually able to do for them. Good evening, Laurence. Thank you guys for joining me. I can't quite believe it, but we are on the 50th Tea with Elsa episode. So for 50 weeks in a row, I have been here on Tuesdays. I can't believe you guys are still joining me. So I'm going to come down in the shade under the walnut tree where these guys are. And Ocasio might show us some of his giraffe moves as he goes to eat the leaves up above him. We'll see. But I wanted to talk a little bit today about, you know, what it is that we have to prove as horse people. You know, a lot of us feel like there's something... Okay, so a little distraction here. You're going to see Ocasio is very immature, and he is always pushing on Ari. He is always biting at him and pushing him and trying to get him to play more. And I sometimes wonder if this is irritating for Ari or if it's just really good exercise for him. It's really fun to watch in any case. So, you know, I love having these two together because Ocasio is rather immature. He's always pushing at somebody. He's always trying to provoke a response. And Ari is very patient with him. He makes a lot of noise, but he's pretty patient playing with the youngster. And, you know, this is one of those quality of life things. I'm really glad they have each other to play with. And not every horse is going to be as patient with Ocasio as Ari is. I can't tell if he's grooming Ari or if he's about to bite him. There he goes. He's about to bite him. So this is the hamstring that Ocasio bites all the time, and he does it because it gets Ari to move. And then they can go play and do things. And then you see Ocasio has a rather short attention span, so he's going to go eat the walnut tree leaves for a little while. So, you know, it's little stuff like this that is really fun for me to watch. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera around here so that I can hold it a little bit more easily and we can watch the horses. I think that having horses, for a lot of us, we feel like we have to prove that we are good trainers or good riders, or we are doing something productive with the horse. And I certainly was like that when I was younger, but as I've gotten older, I realized that I have a lot less to prove than I used to. You know, watching Ocasio be expressive, exactly, Rebecca. You know, just watching him be his expressive self is one of the reasons I have horses. Now, I haven't gone out and bought a horse ever. I've always taken on the horses that, you know, needed rescuing or needed a home. And I think part of the reason is because I could. And part of the reason is because I felt like, you know, maybe those horses that were for sale should really be bought by somebody who had something to prove, something to show off. And I find that I like my horses as companions. I want to teach them as much as they can learn, and they're going to teach me a lot. But mostly what I am trying to do with them is develop the edges of what they want to learn, you know, so I can provide them with enough stimulus and enough interest and the right environments for them to become the best version of themselves. Thank you, Regina. I've worked hard on this setup, and I'm not done yet. I'm still building the track system around the back of the woods, and it's really important to me that they have a good life and they can develop into the best versions of themselves possible. Does that include riding them? It probably does, because I think that horses that are comfortable being ridden are going to have a lot more reliably good homes if I were ever to go away. You know, if I were to die in a car crash and these horses could be ridden, I think that they would get really good homes more easily. And so I will probably make sure they're all rideable, but I will do it very, very slowly. I'll take years and years and years to teach them to be rideable. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm not planning on going anywhere. I'm planning on being here for them for as long as I can. So, you know, Ari was an 8-year-old stallion who came from Nevada, and he came from an area where there was really no more food. You could tell because his hooves were worn down smaller than any horse hooves I've ever seen. His herd traveled miles and miles and miles and miles trying to find enough food and water. And by the time he came into captivity, he had almost no hooves left. It was quite amazing to me to see. Ocasio came from a herd area in Oregon. I don't know very much about why he was brought in, but I would imagine it's for similar reasons. I really like their temperaments. I like who they are. And I think if you ask me what I have to prove as a horse trainer, I want to prove that I can give them the best life possible with a really good education so that they can always have a really good life. But I don't need them to be jumpers. I don't need them to be trail horses. I don't need them to be anything in particular. I just want them to be happy. And if I show up every day and I try and teach them a little bit more about what human beings are like, as you can see, Ocasio has figured out how to get the bamboo down so that he can eat the bamboo. And they're busy. For any of you who are thinking of paddock design, I highly recommend having an island of bamboo in the middle of the paddock. So we have this bamboo patch in the middle, and the horse's paddock goes all the way around it, and they keep it from getting out of hand, but they love to pull it down and nibble on it. Ocasio is eating the walnut leaves right now. You know, these are horses that they were just out in the pasture. They have hay available all the time. And they're also browsers. You know, they like to eat a little bit here and a little bit there of lots of different things. So I like to think that, you know, this stretching exercise that Ocasio's doing, grazing on the walnut leaves, is good for his neck and his back and his body. He gets to stretch in different directions and use himself. Should I be doing dressage every day, helping him develop the muscles to carry a rider? Well, maybe, and we might do that at some point. But for right now, he and Ari are pretty content mooching around the paddock, eating walnut leaves, sniffing things. And, you know, this is the most important to me about having horses. It's not the stuff that I can make them do. It's the stuff I see them enjoying all day long. And you can see my house right behind them. This is what I do. I watch them from my windows all day long, all night long. And I see what they're doing. You know, what would they choose? What do they like? Where do they want to go? I'm actually moving these horses down to our neighbor's land, which is 100 acres of pasture, and I'm gonna miss them. But the mares will be coming up here next to my house. So we have a little swap out where the stallions will get the big pastures and the mares will come up and have the variety of the paddocks up here. Ari's gonna lie down and have a roll. I love this, how they slide down the hill as they're rolling. Again, variety. If you roll on a flat surface, you stay in the same place. If you roll on a hill, you just keep sliding. And all that dust, yeah, I'll have to groom it off later, but it's also a great protection for the flies. He'll have much less problem with the flies being all dusty like that. And Ocasio thinks that's a good idea, so he's going to do it too. And, you know, I think as I get older, this is the stuff I enjoy possibly even more than the training and the riding. And I'm going to keep doing all of that because I believe horses should be educated. But it's not the top of my list. I think, you know, if you ask me what I have to prove, I want to prove that I can set up a really good life for these horses. So I'm going to take you guys on a little walk and let them show us their paddock a little bit, because I'm really proud of this. I'm really pleased that they have such a diverse place to live. A lot of times I wish I had a bigger herd. I think that they would be happier if they had more companions to bounce off of, but I don't have the situation for that just yet. So for now, we just have 3 up at my house. When we move them down to the pastures, they'll be in with a couple more geldings, and we will get our numbers up to 5. We'll have to keep Ari and Atlas separate because they're not really good friends yet, but the geldings get along with both of them, so we can switch them back and forth. So each of the stallions has good companions. Thank you, Kristen. I love this paddock. And, you know, even when I'm out here with my mares and I'm riding, you know, I can ride this whole area and weave in and out of the trees, and the footing is really good. The ground is really good. So this is what I have to prove with horses, is that I can build a really good life for them, and their education is secondary to that. And the thing that I want to do is inspire others who might have some of the same goals. So Ocasio here is very social. Hi. And you can see that he tends to bite a little bit because he wants more to happen. He thinks that everything is too still. You've been there too long already, and can't we do something more interesting? But he's very, very sensitive, so he overreacts really easily. And I think a lot of that is just immaturity. He needs time to grow up. Being in with Ari is really good for him to grow up a little bit and become a horse that can be a really nice riding horse. Yeah, absolutely, Cindy, I understand. But you know, the thing about space is that no matter how much space you have, you always wish for more. That's just how it goes. Huh, Ocasio? I know I do. I would love to have more horses here. I would love to have a bigger, more diverse herd. But 3 horses is about what this space can handle. So for the horses at my house, it's just 3. And as you see, this guy has quite a play drive. You know, it's going to take quite a lot of settling before he's ready to do a lot of work like carrying a rider. Right now, he would need a lot of tools to help manage all of that intensity. And because I don't like training with tools, we're going to let him grow up quite a bit more. And once he's more mature and he's gotten to enjoy this life, then we'll go ahead and start thinking about starting him and riding him a little bit more. But I don't have anything to prove in terms of doing that fast. We will do it when they're ready. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the hay hut. This is one of my favorite things. I've had this hay hut for, I think, almost 20 years now, maybe a little bit less. But you can see they've got 6 openings to stick their heads in. And what I find is, you know, generally we'll have a herd of 3 or 4 horses eating from this. And if the bossy one wants everybody to move, they have to back up before they can chase anyone. And everybody else is already moved by the time they get there. And what I find is it really decreases any sort of aggression, because if you have to back up before you get aggressive, everybody gets a warning and there's really no need for it. Everybody gets the hint before anything gets dramatic. So I've had really good success feeding horses from the hay hut. I really like it also because I can usually put about 2 weeks worth of hay in it. I'm going to see if Ari will. There's Ari. Ari's pretty comfortable putting his head in the hay hut. Ocasio prefers to pull the hay out to him, and the hay net's loose enough that they can really eat either way. So I guess this post is a pretty casual post, and the point that I wanted to make is that not everything is about training or educating or developing the horses. Sometimes it's just about setting up their home environment so that they have the best quality life possible. And I'm finding that's more important to me than the training that I've studied so hard. The training will always be part of it. I want them to be educated. I want them to be good horses. But I think even more than that, I want them to have a really good life. Lillian asks, with your form of training, which I assume has evolved since the hay hut you got, do you notice less aggression in the horses in your home environment? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I find that there's still a wide diversity between breeds, specifically the Mustangs that come off the range that have a very high need for bonding in the herd. If there isn't a really tight bond in the herd, I find the Mustangs get very aggressive to use dominance to try and create that tight bond. And I find a lot of the domestic horses just aren't as tightly bonded as the Mustangs that spent 4, 5, 6 years in the wild. And those horses that have had to live with wolves and wildcats and see their friends die, it's pretty hard to explain to them at first that it's okay if the herd isn't bonded. And so we have had some aggression with the Mustangs with the more domestic horses, just because the more domestic horses don't really understand why they have to be bonded. They've never been out there with real danger. And so I would have to say, Lillian, I would love it if my training method fixed all aggression issues. That would be ideal for me. But there's a lot bigger issues at hand than just my training methods. So thank you, Christian. I'm glad I can give you a little variety of things to talk about. Yeah, exactly, Florentine. Environment and education both are important. So Cindy says, it's always wonderful to see your smile, hear your voice. Mike has said more than once you should do audiobooks. Aw, thank you. Let's see if I can see the rest of this comment. For children, you have such a soothing voice. You know, one of my very first paying jobs was to be a voice on a radio show for a science fiction story. So I do love it. Maybe I'll get back to that. Lillian said, I'd love a discussion on the differences you've observed. Yeah, you know, it is interesting, and I think it varies greatly depending on the climate you live in and the where the horses come from, whether they speak the same language as each other, whether they are very different from each other. You know, I think that saying that violence begins when you don't know what else to do. And there's a really strong thing, I think, between horses that have been raised the same way, that understand each other. And then when they don't understand each other, sometimes they get a little bit violent trying to work out what everybody needs. You can see Ocasio there just reached in and then pulled a whole bunch of hay out of the hay hut for himself to eat. He prefers not to leave his head stuck in the hay hut. All right, let's see. Fonda says, I'm thinking about if I should get a companion for my gelding since my mare died. Another gelding or another mare. How do you choose? It really depends on the rest of your herd. Naturally, horses will have one boy to many girls. And that's the way they're going to be most content, most natural. Occasionally, you can get it to work out with many boys and many girls, but that's a more domestic situation. So you're safest getting another gelding if you think you might have a whole group of them. If you know it's just going to be the two of them, or you're only going to add mares, then you could add a mare for sure. So that's my opinion about it. We used to have 20 some horses, and it was a whole mixed herd of mares and geldings, but we also had 100 acres, and it was a lot of room for them to run when they needed to run. And I think that's the important thing. When you start mixing the mares and the geldings, you got to make sure there's enough space. So if they do have territorial arguments about who gets to stand closest to the pretty girls, you've got space for them to work that out. Let's see what else I've got here. They are so entertaining. I agree, Kim. Lillian says, do you try and organize herd based on upbringing? Do you think this affects the quality of life? So yes, what I find is that generally speaking, I can put one of my Mustangs in with the Arabs and the Thoroughbreds and they do great. When I put several of my Mustangs in, when I get 2 or 3 or 4 of them in with the Arabs and the Thoroughbreds, you have to have a lot of space, because I find that the Mustangs gang up on the domestic horses a little bit when there's several of them. They really like to keep the group tight together, and the domestic horses just don't seem to understand that. And so if you get 3 or 4 Mustangs in a group, they tend to have a bit of a gang, and the domestic horses end up running a bit to try and figure out what in the world is expected of them, because they just don't understand how tightly knit the Mustangs expect them to be. So it's interesting, and I'm sure it's different in different places in the world. You know, that's just been my experience here in the Pacific Northwest with Mustangs that came from Nevada and Oregon. Different places, you're going to have different scenarios play out, of course. Karen says, what similarities do you see between the Spanish Mustang, domesticated, and the wild Mustang? Generally speaking, what I see is that they learn a lot from their mothers. So, as you domesticate them, and they've been in domestication longer and longer, you get sort of a watered down intensity about this need to stick very, very close together and be very tight as a herd. So the more generations that have been in captivity, the more I find they tend to relax about that. The more recently their mother or their grandmother was in the wild where there was real danger, the more intense you're going to find they are about banding really close together and being a little hard on the horses that drift too far away. Again, that's just been my experience here in my area. It could be completely different in other places in the world. So, you know, take that all with a grain of salt. Zena says, I think if we know much more about the horses we're used to train, what they love, what time they eat, what they prefer, more room or to be very close, all will be easier. Watch the horses to make things easier. Yes, and this is what I tell people all the time. If you're having trouble with your horse, notice what their best friends do. Okay, if you have a horse in a whole group, they're not going to be best friends with every horse. They're going to pick someone they like to spend time with more. And if you notice, is that horse more introverted? Is it more extroverted? Is it more quiet? Is it more playful? Is it more serious? Those are going to be the attributes that your horse seeks out. So if you want to be your horse's best friend, you should study what their best friends do. It's really been an eye-opener for me in this last year, particularly around Atlas. I really had to watch which horses he could be friends with and which horses he couldn't be friends with, and study their differences to try and get my feel and my timing better. Kim says, is it best to get another Mustang from the same HMA? You know, actually, I don't know. I have never, I love watching him pull the hay out of the hay hut. I've never gotten two Mustangs from the same HMA. I've always gotten Mustangs from varying HMA. It's just the way it's turned out, so I have no idea. I do tend to get them two at a time in the horse trailer, and they've made friends by the time we get home from the corrals. So even though I don't pick them from the same HMA, they have the bonding experience of coming home in the horse trailer together, which bonds them pretty tightly. Rebecca says, can you talk a little bit about the differences between domestic breeds, Arabs versus thoroughbreds, or is this difference based more in their upbringing? I actually have seen quite a bit of difference. What I find is the horses that have a little bit of... Ari's coming over. Hi, Ari. So here I am. I'm sitting on the ground. They're eating hay behind me. People might say, you know, are you worried? Is that dangerous? Yes, if it was horses I didn't know, this would be dangerous. I know these two really well. I watch them a lot. And so I feel really, really safe here sitting on the ground, even though they're eating hay behind me. So the differences between thoroughbreds and Arabs and various domestic horses, I find that when they have a little bit more cold blood in them, a little bit more draft, even if it's more of the Spanish influence, they tend to be more predictable. Now, it doesn't mean they're not hot, because Spanish horses can be quite hot. But what I find is they're easier to predict the next thing that's going to happen. When you get horses that are bred for racing, the thoroughbreds and the Arabs, not so much the standard breds, but the thoroughbreds and the Arabs for sure, I find that their reflex behaviors are harder for humans to predict. You have to be a little bit more ready for anything to happen. And so generally speaking, when I'm working with students, when I do clinics, the heavier, draftier horses are going to be easier for students to learn on. They can see a sequence. This happens, then that happens, then the other thing happens, and they can be in the right place at the right time. And then even the Spanish horses who are quite hot are still have a really lovely predictability about them. The Arabians, the thoroughbreds, I find you have to be on your toes a little bit more. You can get to know for sure, but they are not as straightforward until they've had quite a bit of training. And so I find that the Arabs and the thoroughbreds depend a little bit more on human education and conditioning to become something that humans can read. It doesn't make them wrong or bad. It just makes them a little harder for us to predict what's going to happen next. Ari here, you know, he's small, he's a Mustang, but he's definitely got some heavy blood in him, and he's lovely and easy to predict. You can see things happening for a long time before they actually happen. And I really like that. It's fun for me. I grew up riding Arabians. I love them. I love them. They have so many beautiful qualities, but I find you have to become a little bit more of a horse person to be able to read their nature, which is not quite as predictable as the horses that have some draft in them. So that's my very overgeneralized answer to your question there. When I look for a horse, I tend to look for something a little heavier now because I really like that predictability as I get older. When I was younger, I loved my Arabians. I loved my thoroughbreds. It kept me guessing. It kept me thinking. It kept my brain spinning. I'm happier to have a little less work now. So that's my thoughts on that. So, you know, just coming back to the original premise, the thing that I have to prove is that I can provide a really good life for my horses. And that when I've got a really good life for them, then I can add training and education in a way that they will voluntarily join me for. And that's what makes me tick. And I hope that, you know, this little tour around our paddocks and a little bit of conversation about it maybe has inspired you guys to think about, what do you have to prove with horses? What inspires you? What do you want to show the world that you can do with them? It's going to be a little different for all of us. And I think it's just recently that I've realized that their home environment is really just as important to me as the way I train them. Florentine, yes, the spots around Ari's eyes. He has a condition, I'm going to say it wrong, but I think it's called vitiligo. And humans have it too. It's where the pigment in the skin starts disappearing in patches. And Ari's is getting quite dramatic looking. He didn't have that a year ago. There is supposedly not much you can do about it. Some horses respond to extra copper in their diet, so he has a new supplement that's coming in the mail, so I can see if that helps him a little bit. I actually really like the spots. I think they're cool looking, but if he needs a little extra copper, I'm going to make sure he gets that. Regina says, do you think horses still bond on a short trail or ride, or does it have to be a long one like ours? It depends on how alike the horses are to begin with. So if you have, let's compare this to human beings. You know how you've met a person and you feel like you've known them all your life. And they're easy to talk to and they're fun and you don't have to work at it. And then you meet a different person and they're a little hard to understand. And it takes you weeks or months or years to really feel like you could be friends with them. So the more different horses are, the longer a trailer ride it's going to take before they get out of the trailer being friends. The more similar they are, they'll bond in 5 minutes in a horse trailer. And the reason that they bond in the trailer is because they end up being forced into doing the same things. Every time you slow the car down, they have to use exactly the same muscles to brace their body. Every time you speed the car up, they have to use the same muscles to brace against that acceleration. You turn a corner, they have to use the same muscles. And so by using the same muscles all the time for hours and hours, they develop an affinity for each other. Look, I've got someone who's just like me. If they're really different characters, it's going to take a lot of hours to prove that. If they're fairly similar to begin with, a very short trailer ride will do it. So, yeah, I'll be putting these guys in the trailer next week to take them to their big pastures. I'm excited about that. So thank you guys for joining me for Tuesday Tea, and thanks for the questions. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week. I'm not really sure if I'll have these boys here still or if we'll have the mares up here then. But we'll let you know. Have a wonderful day, you guys. A wonderful evening wherever you are in the world.